podcast, Chuck Blakeman talks about how to rehumanize workforce and make them ready for tomorrow. So stay tuned. Welcome everyone to Jobs of Future podcast. Today we have with us an amazing guest. We have Chuck Blakeman, and a brief bio. So he's a chief transformation officer and founder of Crankset Group. Chuck's first book, Making Money is Killing Your Business, was named #1 rated business book of the year. And his most recent book, Why Employees Are a Bad Idea, has been named top 10 business book of the year. Both are required readings with several universities MBA and Entrepreneurial program. That's interesting. And Chuck started and built 12 businesses in 25 years in US and internationally, and now uses his experience to help business owners and executives create success. His company, Crankset Group, inspires and transforms your approach to business and future. Chuck is a rare combination of successful business owner, speaker, and author who inspires leaders and provides simple tools to transform businesses. With that, Chuck, welcome to the podcast.
Great. It's great to be with you. And just to let people know how this is going to go, every time somebody reads that, I feel like they're reading my obituary. And obituaries never tell the full truth, and they're always embellished a little bit. And so, yeah, I sound really great. Let's get into it and find out what I'm really like.
I was about to say it's not bad for an obituary, by the way. This is pretty darn amazing. So I think one thing that I found fascinating about your background, Chuck, I think you were talking about interesting aspects, an interesting sort of way to think about humanizing a work culture and impacting the bottom line. Beautiful thought. So before we get into the meat of the stuff, would love to learn about your journey. Like, what brought you to this point?
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm a serial entrepreneur, as you mentioned, and I'm not a business guy. I went to music school, and I did not graduate. I played orchestral music, and it took me 19 years after I was supposed to graduate. I finally got a degree just to make my mom happy, because my brother got a fancy Ivy League thing, and my sister graduated with her master's from Yale, and I didn't even have a bachelor's, and she was the Board of Education president. I mean, this was a real black sheep thing. So I finally just got a degree to help her. But I'm left-handed, I'm right-brained, I'm ADHD and dyslexic. So I just don't see the world like that, like a lot of business people do. And I didn't know that for decades. I knew that I was weird. I had trouble getting out of high school. I thought I was stupid. But through the years, I just did things the way that I thought they would work. I never looked around. One of my great strengths and my great weaknesses is that I don't look at what other people are doing and say, what should I do? Should I do what they're doing? That's a strength, but it's also a weakness because you can learn things. But my strength in that was that I didn't look out there and say, well, this is the way everybody's supposed to run a business, so I guess I'll do that. I just went at it with what seemed to work over the decades. We didn't have titles. We didn't have vacation time. We didn't have set pay structures. We had people who made localized decisions, a lot of self-management and just things that seemed to work. I just believed people were adults and treated them that way, and was surprised when they didn't act that way. And gee, what a surprise, we ended up with a pretty good thing. And then down the road, 8 or so business ends, some of my friends said, hey, can you help me do that? Because it seemed to be working. And so I started helping some friends build businesses without managers, because we've never had managers. We've had 120 plus people in some of my businesses, and managers are the dumbest idea in business. And we can get into that. Not the people, but the process, the actual organizational model. And I just started helping other people do this. And as I was doing it, I began to feel the responsibility. I wonder if what I'm doing is actually a good idea. Maybe I should study some of this. And so I looked at the history of management and leadership and organizations and that stuff. And I got incredible confirmation that what I had fallen into was just simple, intuitive, common sense business stuff that everybody needed. And that set me on the journey of doing this as our company. We now focus on helping other business owners figure out how to rehumanize their workplace by giving everybody their brain back.
Interesting and fascinating, by the way. And what does a typical day in your life look like?
So a typical day for me, two things. You can see this thing behind me. It says "Get off the treadmill." We help leaders figure out how to stop doing the dumb stuff they're doing every day that we call management. Leaders never manage, and managers, by the way, never lead. If a manager is leading, they're mistitled. They should just be called leader and get it out of the way. But most people are doing things like trying to run production processes, marketing, price, assembly, all that other stuff that other people should be doing. Leaders should be caring about the vision, the values, the purpose, the people, all that high level stuff. And when you get all that right, the other people take care of the other stuff. So we want them to get off the treadmill of the day-to-day grind and figure out how to actually have the time to lead. So for myself, I never tell anybody to do anything I don't do myself. I encourage leaders, if you're going to be a leader in your business, you should have a minimum, depending on the size of the business. When it's real small, this is harder, but you get to 10 or 15 or 20 people and above, 150, 500, you should have a minimum of 50% of your time unavailable and unscheduled and unavailable to solve crises. So I'm unscheduled. That's the easy part, but are you unavailable? Can somebody else fix this? You got to get off the treadmill by distributing the decision making. We'll talk a lot more about that. So that's what my day looks like. So I've designed my week over the period over the last 10, 20 years. I work 3 days a week, 3 weeks a month, and I take another week. I take a month off somewhere else in the year. So 2 days a week a month, and a month a year. I get up in the morning saying, what should I do today? I don't go to vacation. People know me. I'm not going to go sit on a beach. But I get up in the morning with the opportunity to do whatever I want. I write. I work with business owners because I chose to. I ride my bicycle a lot. It's a great place for me to get strategic time. If you add up 2 days a week a month, and a month a year, if you add up just that for the business week, it is 73% of the week, of the work week. 73% of my year, I'm unscheduled and unavailable to solve crises. So that's what my week looks like.
That's pretty cool. Darn cool, by the way. And what does Crankset do?
We help other companies at this point in the last 10 years. We help other companies rehumanize their workplaces, like we did for our 12 businesses, by giving everybody their brain back. And people would say, well, don't they already have a brain? Well, there we go. We can get into that. But we're dealing with a system that came from the factories. And we call it the factory system. I didn't make that up, but the top-down management hierarchy was developed in slavery. It came through serfdom into the military, out of the military into business in the late 1700s, and that's our business model: is a slavery, serfdom, military top-down model that basically it turns everybody into an idiot. If you have slaves, you better have managers, because they have no motivation whatsoever to work for you. The only way you're going to get them to work is with a whip. And so the managers today, the whip for managers today is the gun. I can fire you. So we help companies figure out how to remove managers from their process, and to not just about removing managers, but about giving everybody the ability to make distributed decisions. I'll give you an example. It's not a company we worked with, but just to jerk people's chains on this, this sounds really radical. It's not. We're going back where we came from before the factories. That's number one. This is what we did for thousands of years, free people. But you look at, there's a company out there called Hire. Hire has 75,000 full-time people, 90,000 part-time. It's 2.5 times the size of Google. And the entire corporation is set up in 10 to 15 person teams with no managers, not a single manager in the 160,000 plus people. Nobody manages anybody. The 10 to 15 people on each team have their own business center. They're required to put together their own vision, their own strategy, their own processes, their own product development, their own customer strategies, human relation, HR stuff. Everything falls on those individual teams. And oh, by the way, these guys make washing machines and refrigerators. This is not exactly the highest tech company in the world. So it's not like you have to be a bunch of geniuses to pull this off. Hundreds of very large corporations like that have been doing this for up to 60 years, and thousands of smaller ones like ours. So we're helping other companies get into what we call the participation age, which has two hallmarks: participation and sharing. Everybody wants to participate in building a great company, and they want to share in the rewards. How do we actually make that transition from a top-down hierarchy to what we would call a much flatter organization that has no managers in it and has distributed decision making everywhere. How do we do that without chaos? That's what we do on a regular basis.
Interesting. And I think recently I was looking at your book, Why Employees Are Always a Bad Idea. Why such a profound title? Like who came up with this profound title, and just give some background.
All my books have profound, have snarky titles, and that's unashamed marketing, but it's not cheap marketing. I hate cheap marketing, sleazy marketing. I really truly believe that employees are always, no exceptions, a bad idea. And the reason for that is because, again, the concept of an employee, the way we understand the word and the history of that word, it cannot be rehabilitated. It was broken to begin with. It's like saying, well, maybe we should just change the name slave to something else. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. And the same thing with employee. In the factories, in the first factories for about the first 40, 50, 60 years in many of the factories around the Western world, somewhere around 50% of the employees were under the age of 9, and 90+% of them were under the age of 16. They were children. So that's the beginnings of this whole thing. And they weren't they weren't there by their own volition. The first factories were actually factories where they went and they bought orphans. They bought the orphans from orphanages, took them from the orphanages, gave them hotbeds in the factory and worked them 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and gave them porridge. And they weren't there of their own volition. The reason for that is because adults would not do this. They looked at factory work and said, "Are you kidding me? I own my own shoe shop, man. I'm in control of my destiny. You want me to do what? Put a nail in the left boot? That is dehumanizing. I'm out." They couldn't find any adults to do this, so they bought children. And then the poor people began to take stipends or take money to send their kids to factories. And eventually it got to where there weren't enough kids, and they drove enough shoemakers out of work that the shoemakers had to get in there as well. So employees have that word has a terrible connotation, and it has created a mindset of codependency where people show up without their brains to be told what to do. We want to replace that with stakeholders. So employees are always a bad idea. Stakeholders are a great idea. Stakeholders are people, they put a stake in the ground and they own this place. They got a mindset of, I belong here. I'm one of many here who own this place. Even if I don't own it physically, I have a mindset of ownership. I'm a full adult. I bring my brain to work every day, and I contribute, I participate, and I share. We want every employee should be done away with, and every one of them should be given their brains back and become stakeholders.
Interesting. And I think it's a very interesting thought, by the way. So when you talk about employees, right, you have a set agenda. You want to hire them for a reason. You have to fill these guys, folks. But when you talk about stakeholders, you want someone with more ownership, more entrepreneurial spirit and all that, right? So wouldn't that make it a bit harder for companies to supplement so-called employees with so-called stakeholders? What's your thought
that's
on
one
that?
of the first questions. What's one of the first questions I get is, well, where do you find these people? How do you get lucky enough to find stakeholders? Because there's not that many of those people out there with that kind of initiative. And they're right. Well, our research shows, and Gallup and others research show on engagement and disengagement, somewhere around, depending on the research that you see, somewhere around 20% or a little bit more of people are actively engaged. They can't help themselves no matter what environment you put them in. They're going to be adults, and they're going to bring it all. They can't even help themselves. Even if they hate their environment, they're going to be actively engaged. Throughout history, interestingly enough, the same number exists. Before the factories came into being, somewhere around 80 to 90% of all free people owned their own business. And there were 20% that were actively disengaged. We believe that's the true number of people out there who will actually do this. So why is there a disconnect? Why did 20% show up actively engaged today, and yet it was 80% historically before the factories? The answer is because most people need a job, and most people are threatened. The manager has the whip. I can fire you. And if you don't do exactly what I tell you to do, I will fire you. I was unemployable. I worked for 2 other companies, and I was absolutely unemployable because I kept having ideas. And that threatened the manager. I almost got fired once because I came up with a really great idea that the company eventually did after I was gone. But you learn very quickly having a brain at work actually is not a good idea. So I'm going to turn it off. And then you can look around and you say, you know what? I kind of like this. I'm an adult at home. I got enough decisions to make at home. I don't really like making decisions at work. And codependence sets in. Management is nothing more, nothing less than pure, unadulterated codependence. The manager needs somebody to tell what to do, and that's convenient because I'd actually like someone to tell me what to do. So we prove the need for managers by telling people what to do and teaching them codependence. They actually enjoy it, and off we go. Stakeholders are not actually hard to find. 20% are going to do it no matter what, and our estimate is at least another 60% will do it if you remove the gun. And if you allow and require, it's not even allow, but I will fire you now for not making decisions, for not being an adult. All of a sudden, we don't have any trouble finding people. And that's what we find in companies. Rarely do people quit when we put this proposition in place. They realize, okay, now I'm actually going to have to bring my brain. Before, if I brought my brain, I got fired. Now, if I don't bring my brain, I'm going to get fired. And the overwhelming majority step up. And rarely do we have a problem. And then the 5 or 10 or 15% who don't want to adopt will eventually get pushed out by the 80%. And instead of the classic 30% engagement, which is what we have, 20 to 30% engagement, it should be 100.
Interesting. And what about like how would a company look at this model? So I have been dealing with employees forever. The culture sets in. My HR is tuned in. They all understand how this landscape works. Now we're talking about something profound. And whenever you talk about changing culture to something different, it just sends chills to the bone of the corporate structures. Yeah. So how would you see companies responding, or like what have you seen companies responding to something like this? Well,
it's all across the board. With companies that are highly hierarchical. The interesting thing here is when we go into a company and they say, how do you do this? And we say, well, one of the key things is the managers have to get on board with it. Well, ironically, the managers are the ones who perceive, it's not true, but they're the ones who perceive they have the most to lose. So why in God's name would I do this? You're telling me to eliminate managers, and I'm a manager. And I'm one of the ones who has to do this. Well, we're not going to eliminate you necessarily. What we're probably going to do with 70 to 80% of you is put you in a position where you're doing something you're really good at, putting you back in production in a high level way, not as one leader of many. And some of you will make into strategic leaders. So you're in control of your own destiny. If you're already a leader, you'll probably just get blessed and say you're a leader and keep going. So one of the responses is probably the biggest response we get is, this sounds like a good idea. Everybody should have a brain. But I see in front of us, if we do this, we're going to have a lot of chaos and anarchy and upheaval. And we might get there. But 3, 6 months, 12 months later, and I can't afford to do that because we have our quarterly performance we've got to hit as a company. So I can't afford to do this because you're going to mess everything up. Nothing is farther from the truth. Every company that we've seen make this switch from a top-down hierarchy to a side-by-side organization of distributed decision-making teams, every single one of them, as soon as they begin to implement the things we ask them to implement, production, stats, revenue, growth, everything goes up. There is no dip. But that's the biggest problem that we get. The biggest argument we get is things are going to fall apart before they come back together. There's three responses from companies, 3 reasons companies will do this. One is the altruistic response. Whole Foods, what's his name who started Whole Foods? I met him. I was on stage with him. I forget his name. It'll come back to me. But, it was an altruism thing for him. He just wanted everybody to have their brain. It just seemed nice. Seemed like a good thing. Seemed like the right thing to do. Well, great. That's the early adopters might do it for that reason. But then a second reason would be everything's a mess anyway. It's already crumbling. So what we're doing isn't working. Well, let's try something else. So desperation puts people into it. The third one is the best one. It's the data. And the data is for those who are running well, doing great, and saying, why in the world would I ever do this? The answer is because things will run even better. You will make more money faster, have higher production, lower staff turnover, higher retention. Every data point is on the side of going in this direction. So even if things are going well, you should do this.
Interesting. I think one thing that I found fascinating. So there are a lot of a couple of weeks back we have a guest from he co-founded Holacracy. Like, so there are a lot of models that are emerging that are talking about sort of taking this hierarchical approach and reshuffling it and trying to create this distributed decision making processes. And then when we go out and talking to businesses and HR leaders, they get almost chills and when it comes to dealing with, hey, how, like, I cannot fathom this. Sure, it shows results, but it's still a very gimmicky right now. It's very early stage, and that has been like a consistent cry from when you talk to businesses. Like, I have been here for last hundreds of years, and this is not the reason. Like, we have this, it's tested through time, it has tested through evolution, and blah blah blah. So what would you tell or say to those on the fence executives who are listening to this new wave of organizational management?
Yeah, I diverge very, I think Brian Peterson and Brian and the guys at Holacracy, we are in lockstep in terms of what we want as a result. We both want to rehumanize the workplace, give everybody their brains back, and eliminate the whole concept of top-down hierarchy. All that stuff is identical. Our tactics for how to get that done would diverge right out of the gate. I've shared this with those guys. I feel like Holacracy is dead on arrival. And the reason is, and again, it's the most well-intentioned, and I'm not saying I wouldn't have come up with it myself under different circumstances, but the reason it's dead on arrival, Vishal, is because it's a factory system solution to a participation age problem. What did we do for what is it that dehumanized work more than any other thing? It's this. Managers saw an opportunity or a problem. They came up with a solution. They came out of their office. They told people, here's the solution. And they went back into their office. I have no ownership whatsoever in that solution. None. And my only response to it is the time-honored response. I'm either going to do it because I don't want to lose my job, or I quit. But you're not engaging my brain at all. Holacracy is a template. It's a finished template with a constitution right down to exactly how you should run every meeting. All that stuff is laid out for you. And the idea is that you can overlay this one template onto any organization and run the organization with this one template. That is a management response to a distributed decision-making problem. I believe there has to be a different way to run meetings. I believe you probably should have something like a constitution. I believe that you should have, all these things that Holacracy believes in, I believe in. The difference is simply this, Vishal. Where does it come from? Where do those things come from? Do they come from the edges in and the center out organically? Do we figure this out together? Or do they come from the top down? Zappos was the most famous example of Holacracy, and I get that thrown at me a lot because a lot of people buck that. Why? Because it's just another management solution that gives you with a much better outcome, but it's still a management solution. So once you get there, well, then it probably does work. But the other problem with it again is that every company is a snowflake. So we present these things in principle. We have to run meetings differently, and there's 15 great ways to run meetings. There's not just one. So which one would work for you guys? You guys figure that out. Everybody figures that out together. And the simple end of this discussion is this: input equals ownership. The more input I have in a solution, the more ownership I'll have in it. We want to arrive at the same place, but we're going to take people through a process where we get them to own it. The other difference here is that what we do is not subtractive. It's actually additive. So we do not go in and say, let's destroy all managers and let's take away everything. No, we're going to add some things that create horizontal relationships that begin to naturally replace our codependency on the things above us, so that over a few weeks, few months, and maybe a year, we begin to look around and both the manager and us agree we don't need each other anymore. We got this. And so it's a much more additive process and doesn't disrupt.
And when you talk about the companies, right, who are on the receiving end of these new modified templates to execute, whether it's yours, whether it's any peers. So what would you tell to those executives who are running a very legacy old school companies who have not yet who are very sort of engraved and thickened on their spine of the organizational hierarchy and not very sort of, they get paranoid with these new frameworks that are coming in. What would you say to those guys?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would go after is the data, because the data, let's just deal with facts. Let's not deal with emotions or altruism or any of that nonsense. Let's just decide which one of these works better. And I'll give them hundreds of large corporations with thousands to tens of thousands of people and thousands of smaller ones. And we'll just look at the data. Every one of those companies that lives without managers, that has distributed decision-making teams at their core, run at the top of their industries. They have the lowest staff turnover. They have the highest retention. They have the highest productivity. Just examples like Wegmans Groceries in the East Coast. The average turnover in a grocery store is like 35 to 40% or more. For the last 30 plus years, Wegmans turnover retention is 3%, or turnover is 3% or less. Now, you put that up, it's not even a fair fight with all the other grocery stores in the area when you can keep your bag boys and checkout clerks for 10 or 15 years instead of 3 months. That kind of data. So you grow faster. And again, there's just tons of data on this. There's no data on the side of continuing doing what we're doing. So if you're data driven, then let's look at the data, and that's the first place to say it. And then if they say, well, okay, let's do this, and what's the first thing we need to do? The first thing after that is we have to look at what we believe. What do we believe about business and about people? It's in 1960, again, none of the stuff I'm talking about here is new. It just sounds new. In 1960, Douglas McGregor wrote a book called The Human Side of Enterprise. And he was playing off of a paper from 1911 by Frederick Winslow Taylor called Scientific Management. In that paper, Scientific Management, Winslow Taylor made the fatal error of defining employees in two ways. They are stupid and they are lazy. And he used both those words and spoke at length about the problem. And therefore, if that's true, then you need managers. It's the only solution. You need find the few smart and motivated people, lord them over the stupid and lazy ones, and thus management was born. Well, Douglas McGregor said, okay, that's theory X. People are stupid and lazy. What if we tested theory Y? Let's go after that. People are smart and motivated. And so he would look at, he found companies, he found like 6 companies in the same industry, 3 of which thought their people were stupid and lazy, and 3 of which the leaders thought their people were smart and motivated. And then he looked at the results. Gee, what a surprise. In the companies where the leadership thought people were stupid and lazy, everybody was stupid and lazy. And in the companies where people were smart and motivated, everybody was smart and motivated, and they had better retention, higher productivity, faster growth, higher profits. Both of these are self-fulfilling prophecies. Why? Because I have something in my head that I believe about people, about work, about business. So we have to go after what's in our heads. Again, the chaos is not in your business, it's in your head. And if you want to find out what's in your business, in your head, take a look at your business and then figure out why. What is it in your head that's doing this? So we help them work through their very simple core beliefs about people, business, success, money, strategy. And it's amazing how much of what we inherited from the factory system infiltrates and damages the way we view people. Just that one thing. If I believe people are smart and or stupid and lazy, and you think they're smart and motivated, then how do I value them? Well, I value them very little. And how do you value them? Very high. And how do I think of them? As disposable. How do you think of them? As indispensable. And off we go. Just that one little thing. So we have to deal with what's in our heads first. And I can't work with a company where the CEO says, well, I'm pretty sure people are stupid and lazy, but it looks like you got good data on your side. So why don't you go work with my people and set them free? It starts with him and with the leadership team. If they don't truly believe that their people are smart and motivated, if they can't do what Hire did and have a 75,000% person corporation that is broken up into 10 to 15 person teams, then we're dead in the water.
Interesting. So you said, I think you used a beautiful word called rehumanize workforce, right? So what do you mean by that? Like what exactly is rehumanizing workforce?
And I had to study that because I had come to that intuitively, say, all right, well, is that just cute, or is that really something that is? What makes us human? Let's start with that. Well, the first thing that makes us human is awareness, that we're aware of our timeline and that kind of stuff. And then beyond that, what makes us human? And actually, the second thing that makes us human more than anything else is creativity. And creativity shows itself in our ability to build skyscrapers, to understand the universe at a molecular level, to build a fence, to create a piece of art, welding. Accounting is creative. It's not just painting. Because what is the thing that makes us creative? Behind that is the key to rehumanizing or dehumanizing. Creativity is nothing more, nothing less than a series of decisions. Michelangelo, the story is he walked around a piece of granite in the courtyard of the cathedral in Florence. He walked around this piece of granite, just walked and walked around it until he saw what was in there, and then he just chipped away everything that wasn't that, and David emerged. And that's kind of how he explained it. It's a series of decisions. I've written music. My family's artistic. I mentioned I've come from that background. Art is nothing more than a series of decisions. Well, should I go this direction? Should I go that direction? How you get to work is a creative process. Should I go left? Where's the traffic? What lane should I be in? Everything is about decision making. When I get to make decisions, that humanizes me and it makes me adult. What's one of the things that changes me from a kid to an adult? I remember when I got to college, I bought a half gallon of ice cream. I stuck it in the fridge and I looked at it and said, I can eat that anytime I want. I'm an adult. Now that also comes with the responsibility. I can eat that anytime I want. So it's decision making, Vishal. When we talk about rehumanizing the workplace and giving everybody their brain back, the methodology, the practice for doing that is universally distributed decision making through what we call distributed decision-making teams, or DDM teams. Every team makes localized decisions based on what will actually impact them.
Interesting. So I think well said. So if I'm a corporation, right? If I'm an organization, when is the right time to think that, okay, there's a problem and I need fixing? Like, what are some of the litmus tests or some of those indications that just point me to, hey, I should maybe look for a solution? Yeah.
This isn't sandbox stuff. This isn't woo-woo crap stuff. This is hardcore success strategy. So how do you manage? How do you manage this stuff? You don't manage the people, but you start to figure out, how do we make this go? There are three major main responsibilities of a leader. Managers don't do this, although good managers will do these things as well. But a leader's responsibility are three things: guard the values, champion the people, and pilot the results. Guard the values, champion the people, and pilot the results. Managers, one of the three main things that distinguish a manager from a leader is managers focus on process, leaders focus on result. So a manager says, how are we going to do this? And he comes out of his office or her office and tells everybody, here's the process, now go run it. Again, no decision making, I'm dehumanized. A leader will come out of their office and say, they won't even say, here's the result I want. What they will say is, what result do you think we should have? You cannot lose asking that question. He or she should already have in their head what result they think they want. But why would you not ask them first? I consulted with one of the four largest software companies in the world, and I'll just leave it at that. And they couldn't understand. They would come and tell people that we're now going to raise our goal from 5 billion to 22 billion for the year, and here's the process for doing it. And they were confused as to why people were resisting that or were not on board with it. They're just telling people what to do. So we can't take that approach. We've got to take the approach of coming out of our office and asking them, what do you think we could do? They might have said 25 billion. But look, if there are 5 billion and everybody in the 2,000 people in your division say, we think we can get to 6 billion, and you got 21 billion in your head, you got a problem. You need to know that. But instead, the guy came out of his office and said, here's 20, we're going to do 21 billion. What did everybody do? They nodded their heads and they pretended like they were on board. And then it didn't happen because they didn't have their input. Let's figure out what we can actually do. And you might end up at 18 billion because they didn't realize all the things they could do that you can help them with. That's leadership. So ask questions, come out of your office and say, what result do you think we can get? And then you focus on that. You agree together on what result you can get. And here's the magic. You turn the process over to them. The how becomes theirs. This is how you rehumanize the workplace. We agree together on what result we want. Now you go figure out how to get that result. You use your brains and apply it to whatever process. And if you need me, I'll help you with that. But I'm not going to tell you how to get that result. And then I'm going to monitor that result. We are going to monitor that result. So to answer a long-winded question, a long-winded answer, but if they're not getting the result we all agreed on together, you're right back there saying, okay, is the process you guys designed working? Maybe we need to come up with another one. Have you tried this? What about that? Offer solutions. It's not abdication, it's leadership.
Interesting. And one thing, when I think about these organizational structure and how businesses are appreciated today, right? So if you see any publicly traded company, they are appreciated for their bottom line and their predictable growth, right? Or at least unpredictable success, right? So whichever goes higher. So when you talk about those sort of parameters, which are very number driven and very bottom line driven, those parameters not necessarily go hand in hand with a good corporate culture. Many times it promotes this idea of cutting corners. It promotes this idea of doing more with less and less. So how would, from your vantage point, how would this impact, or this ideology of bottom line and predictable success ideology fiddle with your sort of approach of rehumanizing workforce?
Yeah, great question. This is bottom line driven. Again, you give me 10 companies that you think are at the top of the industry that aren't self-managed with the DDM teams, and give me all of their data on growth, productivity, profit, revenues, retention, all that stuff, and I'll put them up against 10 teams in the same industry, 10 companies in the same industry that have no managers, and the bottom line data will be better. So this is bottom line driven. The difference is what we're really talking about here is short-term versus long-term decision making. And in most companies, they don't understand, they don't play the long game, they don't understand that being nice to people and treating them like adults will make them more money. Here's the dirty little secret in business. When you treat people nice and you treat them like adults, you make more money. Yeah, I don't have time for that crap. I got a quarterly number to make. And so we start squeezing things, cutting corners. I mean, they're squeezing and cutting corners right now. And we're going to teach them how not to do that. But it's not again about having a dip. It's about changing the way you get that quarterly number by inviting everyone to participate. If you look at participation age DDM team cultures, one of the things you will find almost universally is almost complete and utter transparency on the numbers. To the point where in most of these companies, or in at least a lot of them, they know what everybody else makes, including the CEO. You can go on a computer and type anybody's name and you find out exactly what they make, benefits, the whole thing. And in some of them, they actually allow everybody to type in their own salary and say, here's what I'll make. Now, they also have peer reviews that temper that. But the point is, utter transparency creates, first of all, when you treat people like adults, they start acting like them. So if you don't treat them like adults, you say, well, I can't let them do this because they'll wreck the place. Well, you've created this codependency. But secondly, when you have utter transparency, people step up. I'll give you some concrete examples. Long ago, when we decided that we weren't going to keep track of expenses anymore, where you're an adult, do what is in the best interest of the company and do what you would do if it was your company. We stopped tracking expenses. On a global level, each year when we look at our expenses for travel and entertainment, that kind of stuff, they're exponentially lower than when we tracked expenses every year. We decided that we would no longer track vacation, unlimited vacation. Get your job done. If you get your job done, we don't care where you are and we don't care when you are. as soon as we did that, people started taking less vacation. We actually had to institute a vacation uh, 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 revenue where you get $1,500 or $2,000 if you go on vacation. We'll pay you to go on vacation. When you treat people like adults, they act like adults. And when you give them utter transparency, they figure things out. Barry Waymiller had and so did Semco. They had these issues in the recession where they figured they needed to cut 20% of their staff. But they were already showing everybody all the books. And so they put it to the people and said, what do you think we should do? Across the board, both companies decided, well, we'll all just take 20% pay cuts so we don't have to fire anybody. And if somebody can't afford to do that, well, I'll take more time off because that single mother needs more time at work or whatever. And it all worked out. Utter transparency turns us into adults, just the opposite of what we think. We think we need to guard all our numbers so that nobody can see them.
Interesting. And one more debate that we are hearing a lot nowadays is businesses' emphasis on doing more with less workers, right? So
Sure.
Can I do it with 10% less, 18% less? I have a mandate to blah blah blah, and those areas to cut corners and trying to figure out how would something like this, or how would these innovative solutions,
Yeah.
how would this ideology of doing more with less workers fiddle around with these innovative distributed decision-making systems?
So we have 12 basic tools, and they're more principles and practices. We don't give a template, but here's practices for how to build a participation age company. And one of those is incentives. One of the massive shifts, one of the tectonic shifts from the factory system top-down hierarchy to a DDM team structure is to remove all bonuses and replace them with incentives. And here's the difference. Bonuses are time-based. Incentives are results-based. And so we want everybody to be a capitalist. So we turn everybody, including the receptionist, into a capitalist. We lower their hourly pay, and we give them incentives that are measured by our team surveys, as well as customer surveys, as well as hard metrics, what we call production metrics, and all of that feeds into them getting a money that will allow them to actually, without fail, everybody in our business makes more money. Their hourly rates are exponentially lower than other people who do the same job, and they make more money than everybody else around them. They would never leave, and it's because they're capitalists. They have a say in their destiny. So the point of that rant is, how do we do more work with less? Well, we had a company in DC that had 18 truck drivers, and those 18 truck drivers were all paid $18 an hour, and they were doing work that was highly inefficient and really doing it badly. We took them all. We didn't do it involuntarily. We asked for volunteers. Maybe 2 of the 18 decided they would do it, and as people left, we began replacing them with other people who would take $11 an hour. What are you, nuts? We get 18 anywhere else. You're going to pay us 11. Yeah, but here's the deal. Based on the metrics that you produce, you could be making 19, 20, 21, 22, 24. You could be making exponentially more, and you will make 18 if you just do the job the way it's supposed to be done. You'll make 18, and then you can go from there. Well, here's what happened. They had 18 truck drivers making $18 an hour. They ended up with 11 truck drivers making on average $19.75 an hour. And they got more, and those 11 people got 100 and I think it was like 140% more work done between the 11 of them. You want to talk about saving money and doing things with less? Well, then rehumanize your workplace, give everybody their brain back, capitalize it, make them all into capitalists, and watch what happens. Remember what I said up front: the participation age is 2 things: participation and sharing. Most of the work today in business is about this funny word called engagement. People are spending millions of dollars on engagement. Engagement is not a process; it's a result of rehumanizing your workplace. And you can't. It's a false narrative because what's really happening here is people are CEOs and leadership teams are communicating, I want you to produce more so that I can run off with more. Well, it's participation and sharing. You can't ask me to participate if you're not going to share. But if you share, we both make more money. And that example in DC is a classic example of that.
Interesting. Good example, by the way. And thank you for sharing that. So another interesting area where we see some hesitation when we talk to businesses about this innovative frameworks. So unionized workforce, right? So anytime corporations comes with say any innovative solutions, the union get gung ho about it, right? They want to protect. So it just gets nowhere, and many of these businesses are really struggling because of unions. Um, how would your framework work around
Sure.
those
Yeah.
opportunities?
We don't need to work around them. This is where it gets fun. Again, all the data is on the side of doing this. I can't think of any hedges to doing this. Company in Brazil called Semco. The author, the guy who turned that company around wrote a book called Maverick. We can talk about that later. But Semco had in 1980. Semco was a top-down classic manufacturing facility. They made pumps, heavy pumps. And there were 300 people and $4 million, really bad revenue. They'd been around for 30 years. And he decided he was going to take this thing over. And the first day he fired 60% of the managers, which was a mistake. He should have been additive, not subtractive. And as a result, it took him 8 or 9 years to actually get this thing figured out to where it had no managers. They are Brazil. They are one of the most unionized, most bureaucratic places on earth. So the government and the unions are absolutely stifling in Brazil. He decided that he was going to. He came in with a different belief system. We're back to these beliefs. What do I believe? Well, he believed that people are smart and motivated, and so he said, I'm going to found this on 2 principles. Principle number 1 is trust in adult behavior. I'm going to trust that these adults are actually adults. I'm not going to treat them like children. So there's all kinds of therefores to that. In Brazil, to show you how bad it is with the unions and with the relationship with management, you get frisk, at least in 1980, you got frisk going into the factory as well as coming out. It's that bad. So he went to the unions and said, okay, I'm going to trust in adult behavior. Therefore, we are no longer going to frisk people going in or going out. No more frisking ever. We just trust in adult behavior. And for the very few people that will do it wrong, well, I'm sure somebody will figure that out and we'll fire them. But we're not going to drag everybody to the bottom for the very few. We're trusting in adult behavior. And the union struck. And the union said, we don't know what you're trying to do here. It sounds good, but anything that management does is evil. We know that you're doing this to hurt us. And he said for the next 2 or 3 years in a row, every time he tried to rehumanize the workplace, they would strike for a month or 2 or 3 until they figured out, I can't find any holes in this. By 1990, 10 years later, you ask the unions in Brazil that dealt with heavy manufacturing, and they would say, Semco is the only company in Brazil we implicitly trust. If they want to do something, we just say, sure, go ahead. And they have an ongoing great relationship with Semco. So once again, you win if you do this.
Interesting. And typically, like if you're an executive or if you are a stakeholder who realize that something needs to change and something needs to happen, like what would you advise us as some 3 or 4 tactical steps that I should take to get started on this? Yeah.
First one is the mindset thing. So you have to check your own mindset and your own belief systems. Do I truly believe that I can trust in adult behavior, or do I believe that in my head but not in my heart? Can I actually live that out? And then I'd say the second thing would probably be in the area of thinking about people, not person. Change your mindset about how things have to run. When we look at Google came up with the 10 behaviors that people want at work. And they said, as a result of that, they made this huge leap from here's 10 behaviors people need at work to managers are necessary because we need one person who will deliver those 10 behaviors. That's just a silly, nonsensical leap with no logic in it at all. There's no correlation. It's like, the old thing you learn in school that crime goes up with ice cream consumption. Therefore, ice cream causes crime rate. I mean, there's no correlation, but they made that correlation. Here's the better correlation. If there are 10 behaviors that people want at work, don't look at a person to deliver those. Look at people to deliver them. So the second thing to think about here is, how do I begin to look to people, not person? Example would be, if you're a company of let's say 12 people and you have one manager, how about making the manager is good at 5 of those 10 things. They're never good at all of them. How about if you find 2 or 3 other people, or you help the manager, or you just put it out there to the rest of the crew and say, here's 5 things that aren't covered. Who do you think you would like to have step up and be one of those people? And now instead of a manager, you have a team of leaders. You have 2 or 3 or 4 people, and all 10 of those things get covered. So people, not person. Leadership teams, distributed decision-making teams. We're always looking for the genius hero. It's again, people think I hate managers. I don't. I'm a fan. I love the people who attempt to do this, but they are set up to fail. Nobody can do all 10 of those things that Google has identified. And if you're lucky, you got somebody who's a freaking genius hero who can do maybe 5 or 6 of them. It's one of the reasons people hate their managers, because they're looking to them to be everything, and they can't. What if we actually just took the 10 people and took those 10 things and said, okay, who can do number 1? And somebody volunteers Bob and says, well, I think Bob would be good at reports. And everybody else agrees. Okay, now we've just set up Bob as our leader. And then who could do the mentoring or the training? And you set it up, and you might end up with, out of the 10 people, you might end up with 5 people who deliver those 10 things. And now you're getting all 10 of them, and you're getting them as a team, and you're building community together. And so you can see how this is working. Everybody gets their brain back, not just in production, but in actually living in community at work.
Interesting. And when say, now let's put a focus on startups, right? So if I'm a very early startup just coming along, from your vantage point, from your perspective, when is the right time I should start thinking about something like this?
The day you figure out what product you're going to sell. I'm sure you've heard of W.L. Gore. They sell Gore-Tex. Well, W.L. Gore, Viv and Bill Gore started W.L. Gore in their basement in 1958. And from the minute they started it, they said, we're not going to do the hierarchy thing. We're just not going to do that. We don't know what it'll come up, but we know that we can trust that people will have brains, and so we're just not going to do that. From the minute they started it, it's now a 10,000 person, $3 billion company. And for the last 60 years, there have been no managers at Gore. The CEO will not accept the title. She calls herself, I think, chief troublemaker or something like that. So the minute you start, that is the easiest. You know, it's not as easy to turn the Queen Mary in the bathtub. If you got 30 years of being a top-down hierarchy, then companies like ours have to come in and help you figure out how to do that, so that you go straight up instead of creating the chaos you think you might get. If you start this way from scratch, we can still help you with that, but it's a way easier process.
Interesting. And in your experience, like, who are some of the toughest managers who just simply, like, that you have worked with explaining this and they may not get it? Like, and who are the easiest ones? Like, what are the ingredients of both the sides of who can get this philosophy? The
easiest managers to work with are the ones who don't act like managers. They act like leaders. They just intuitively act like leaders. Here's the difference. Well, I'll give you the definitions. No, I won't do that. It's easier this way. When I talk to a manager, I get the sense that they are important. When I talk to a leader, I get the sense that I am important. So the difference is that the manager sees you as a part of the top-down hierarchy. We call it a pyramid scheme because that's exactly what it is. The people at the top are going to benefit from the people at the bottom. And the people at the bottom understand that they exist in order to feed the people at the top. It's a user's world. And so the manager's job is to get as much as they can out of those people and be a user of them and see them that way. A leader will understand that if they actually train these people, teach them how to make decisions and get the heck out of the way, that the company will be better off. We'll all make more money. We'll all be better off. So am I a servant or am I wanting to be served? The people who want to be served are the ones who have the most difficulty with this. The ones who like the walnut office and the big chair and the title on their shoulder and the ego and all of the other intangible pathological things that come with this. Those are the people who have the most to work through. But the people who are the managers who have already been working, people say, well, you throw stones at managers. I love my manager. And then I ask them what they do. And sure enough, they're acting like leaders. They're not coming out of their office telling people what to do. They're coming out, pulling the people together and saying, hey, what do you guys think we should do? And they're facilitators, they're guides, they're supports, they're visionaries, they're champions. That's what they guard the values, they champion the people, they pilot the results. So those are the easiest people to work with. We just need to change their titles. The others, we have to work a lot with the deep-seated belief systems that the factory system taught them. And I think we have to be fair, because a lot of people did not, they're not naturally this way. We taught them. We taught them 175 years of this nonsense. We taught them that this is how to do it. So we have to be patient and help retrain them. We're not disposing managers. We find on a regular basis people who are deeply entrenched in top-down management get excited about this stuff. And it might take them a year or two to figure it out, but they figure it out.
No, I think you have raised a very interesting point. So I think in one of the conversation, I remember that someone was telling me that, hey, if you see how we were raised, right? So we were put in a room, 40 people 40 kids in a room. We were taught something for X years. Every year we grew to something, and we became seniors. Now we come out. So our brain is intuitively trained in this way to appreciate hierarchy and appreciate. So it's very difficult to now think otherwise of how it's going to go.
I mean, just an example of how deeply true, what deep truth there is in rehumanizing the workplace. Just the example you gave there of the education system, how broken that is. We have no idea how broken that is. The word education comes from the root word educe. Educe means to draw out. Nobody in college is drawing anything out. You're sitting in rows and you're filling those empty heads of mush with my information, and I'm filling you up. I'm assuming it's empty in there. But education, Socrates type education says it's all in there. I just need to help you learn how to learn and how to ask questions and how to draw it out of you. We actually do inducation. Induce means to fill up, which is why you get a baby out of there. You fill it up with something else. You induce. And so we're not doing education, we're doing inducation. So just that right by itself. And sure enough, if you look around, you find a participation age school system. A very valid school system in every state in America now. No classrooms, no classes, no teachers, no curriculum, and everything is run by adults. There are adults. There's like one adult for every 20 kids, but they are facilitators.
Right.
And so if two kids are playing cards, they go over and they help the kids learn how to do. There's all kinds of things you can do with that. Kids learn at their own pace. It sounds like chaos and anarchy. It's not. 85% of those kids go on to higher education, including Harvard. And the number one complaint they have about their college roommates is they don't take responsibility for their lives.
Interesting. And one, I need your thought on one last thought in this idea of reorganization, right? So right now, even my company is investing a lot into this idea of retraining, re-educating, right? So right now, the skill that is required to stay relevant in workforce.
Sure.
It's now, there are a lot more skills that are emerging that one needs to be trained for, and the shelf life of skills are diminishing, right? So there needs to be some effort going on. So when you talk about your framework of rehumanizing workforce, how would that tapered around this idea of, because when we were young, we were in college, and then some piece in the college that we studied end up in the job. So we had some transition over, and we stayed relevant for some time before we hit something. Right now, the kids what they are studying in the schools, the moment they join workforce, it's totally different world. The skills that they're trained for is not even what's relevant anymore in the workforce. So how would your structure helps with this idea of re-educating or re-energizing the workforce to stay relevant?
It's a great question. So, first of all, HR still has a role here, not the role they used to have. They're no longer the codependent mother. We're going to take care of our own problems. But this is one thing they can do is continue to present. To begin with, it's an education issue. that one of the responsibilities of the company is to continue to educate their people as to what they need. If you want to stay relevant with us and you want to keep moving forward with us, this is where we're going. And so this programming language in 5 years, we're not going to be using that, or, we're going to be low code, no code. We're not going to use Ruby on Rails anymore. We're done. So you better figure out the low code, no code thing. And you got 5 years to figure it out. Get after it. So there's an education process or responsibility in our part to not spring things on people and say, okay, we no longer need this. We now need that. And you're not equipped for it. Be in communication. Then the second piece of it is we do not take responsibility for them getting retrained. We give them all the information about what they need. We make that available to them. And then we want people to be surprised, adults. Who told that person they had to go to college? Who actually made them go to college? Who told them what they had to sign up for? Who told them what house to buy? Who to marry? We're not going to do that at work either. We're going to provide you with the opportunity, and then we will train you. And in many cases, we've trained people in things that have nothing to do with where we are or even where we're going. We had one woman who was a receptionist who she wanted to learn how to do design work, and she found a $1,000 course that would help her do that. We paid for the course. Had nothing to do with what we're doing or where we're going, but we knew that if we help her develop, she's going to be more productive and more loyal to us. So it's on us to educate them, and it's on them to step up and be proactive and lead from your seat. Get out of your seat. Don't play the victim and say, I need to go get this, either here internally or somewhere else. I got to go get it. But we need to be involved in helping them understand what they need.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Chuck. I think that was really, really helpful. So now we are at the tail end of the conversation, and I want to spend a few minutes on your journey, understanding. So we ask our guests to share about, say, 1 to 3 things that has really helped them stay successful throughout their span. Like, what would you attribute? Like, what are those qualities you attribute to success to? Like, what would you call that has helped you stay successful?
Yeah, I've never actually written anything on this, but I plan to at some point. 2 sentences define everybody's lives. See if this is true or not. Sentence number 1 is, I can't do that. Sentence number 2 is a question. How do I do that? And so one of the things that has defined my life, and I didn't figure this out until I was probably in my 30s or 40s. I was the youngest of 4 children. I was completely ignored, all kinds of wham stuff. But I learned that I had to survive in the world around me, so I figured out how to get stuff done. And I never looked at anything with the attitude, I can't do that. It was always, well, I don't know how. I might even say I don't know how to do that, but then it would immediately be followed with, how do I do that? So I learned how to throw pottery. I learned how to run a marathon. Everything. I ran 12 businesses in 8 different industries, and I didn't know much about any of those. And so I think that's one key to success. And Carol Dweck, 20 years later, comes out with a book called Mindset that basically says, fixed mindset, growth mindset. Well, there it is. I can't do that. Or how do I do that? So that's number 1. And then the second thing for me has been this idea of being relentless. And I'm writing a book on that as well right now, just telling stories of myself and other people. It's not about being smart. And it's not about being lucky. It's about being relentless. If you look at people there are some people who were not all that smart and not all that lucky, who were highly successful. And if you look at why, it's because they never gave up. Last man standing. Winston Churchill said leadership is the art of getting up one more time than you got knocked down. So just being relentless. And that's interesting, Vishal, because as a kid, I was known as the quitter. I quit everything. If it got the least bit hard, I quit. And I quit school. I quit everything. So my great strength or my great weakness became my great strength. And I didn't realize this. I had to form this in my 40s and early 50s. So that's the second thing, is to be relentless. And then the third one is to be a learner, to be open and transparent, to be willing to be wrong on a regular basis, to know that you don't know. The old adage that as soon as I have something figured out, that's when it gets dangerous. So when I first started golfing, after a year of golfing, I figured I knew like 30% of what I needed. And by the time I got to a 10 handicap, I figured I knew 80% of what I needed. And then I got a coach, and I got down to a 2 handicap, and I figured out, I probably know about 15% of what I need to know to actually. The more we know, the less we should know.
Yeah.
So stay fascinated. Maybe that's the better way to stay. Just stay fascinated.
Well said, and thank you for sharing that. And one more thing I really want to know your perspective on is, so what would be your favorite read that you want to share with our listeners and viewers? Like, we ask all of our guests to share their favorite read, any book.
Sure. I would say one that I talked about today, Maverick. I got a bunch of them, so there's not just one. My favorite all-time read, I'll say, is Self-Made in America by John McClintock. You've never heard of him? I don't push forward a lot of motivational speaker kind of stuff or motivational books. This is the only motivational book I'll recommend, and it's because it's not written by a motivational speaker. It's written by a guy who put hair salons in Texas. And it's one of the most motivating books you could ever get, because this is real live bullets this guy's shooting. This is not, walking on cools or singing Kumbaya or chanting at your vision board. This is real stuff. So Self-Made in America, but related to what we're talking about today, Maverick. The book Maverick by Ricardo Semler, which journals it tells his journey from a top-down hierarchy to a self-managed distributed decision-making team model.
Interesting. And I think the last question I have for you, and thank you for very gracious with your time. So if you want our listeners and viewers to take something away from this conversation, like, what would that be? What would be your parting thought to our listeners and viewers?
Fill holes. And what I mean by that, my life vision, and I got this from somebody else. I don't think I've ever had an original thought in my life, but I'm pretty sure you haven't either, so I'm okay with that. But I stole this from somewhere. My life question has been, why do what others can and will do when there's so much to be done that others can't or won't? So what is it that nobody else is doing today? Nobody's helping that little old lady across the street, or nobody's creating this piece of software to solve that problem, or what is it I can do to be of contribution in the world around me? Let me fill a gap today. Let me fill a hole. Here's the dirty little secret in life that took me many decades to find out. The happiest people on earth are solving other people's problems. Find a hole in somebody else's life and fill it today, and you will be happier because you paid attention to their problem, not your own.
Beautifully put. With that, Chuck, thank you so much for sitting with us, helping us understand this idea of rehumanizing workforce and sharing your thoughts, and wish you nothing but success in your journey. And we are always welcome on the podcast. And whenever you are in Boston, do let me know. We'd love to sit with you at some point and have this amazing conversation with you face to face.
We might want to talk, because I'll be at Tufts University in a few weeks at one of their MBA classes, so stay tuned. And that's beautiful. I think I might be at Harvard at the same time, so I think both of those are in Boston. So
yes, love to.
We didn't talk about it, but if people want to get a hold of us, they can just go to chuckblakeman.com. That's the easiest thing to do. Just go to chuckblakeman.com and you'll get all the information you need if you want any from us.
Yes, and our listeners and viewers, we will also put all the links that Chuck talked about, his book, and wherever you can go to study his ideology on this reorganization, rehumanizing workforce template. So thank you so much, Chuck, on that.
Thank you. Appreciate it so much, Vishal.
Yep.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on the